talk a lot about the fact that when art forms age, they divide into intellectual art forms, intellectual products that nobody likes but the critics, and popular products that really kind of empty calories. I mean, I think that I talked about this in the movies, that nobody goes to see the serious movies anymore, but everybody goes and watches these superhero movies, which are really not very good. In the old days, the popular movies were also the great movies, things like The Wizard of Oz, Gone with the Wind, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Those were Oscar-nominated, popular, top of the box office films, but they were also great films. One of the reasons I talk to thriller writers is I feel that in the novel, which has become virtually a dead art form, the thriller, crime stories, and science fiction and fantasy are the forms that are still alive and are attracting some of the best writers. My friend, Gregg Hurwitz, I don't know if you're a best writer, but no, it's great to see you.
I thought you were going to say, I don't know if you're my friend. I was waiting for that one, Drew.
You are terrific. Your new book is Out of the Dark, and we'll put it on the screen so I don't have to hold it up the whole time. It's great to see you.
It's good to see you, too.
So these books are bestsellers. This is a really interesting character. His name is Evan Smoke. Describe the character.
Well, he was taken out of a foster home at the age of 12 and raised in a assassin program off the books.
That happened to me.
It is, yeah. That explains some of the aggression, Drew. And basically, he was brought up in what's called the orphan program to conduct operations where the United States is not allowed to be and to do things that the U.S. cannot do. And at a certain point, after operating and being trained up to be this person, the moral ambiguities of the program got to be too much. He left the program, went on the run, reestablished himself in Los Angeles, and is essentially a pro bono assassin. Now, he's only available to people in desperate need who have nowhere else to turn, and he's using all of those skills and doing it to help people who are up against impossible odds.
You know, it really is. It reminded me, it's really funny. I was thinking to myself, you know what would be good? It would be a good idea to do The Equalizer as a modern guy. And then I thought, damn it, Gregg got there first. Because it really, it's more in keeping with The Equalizer than The Equalizer movies are. I mean, it really has that spirit of a guy who was trained for bad things, but he's bringing it to the people.
Well, yeah, and it's like every mission that he does now, he gets back a tiny piece of his soul. And so he's trying to sort of rebuild this moral center. But one of the things that's so funny is, I don't know if you have this experience, whenever I'm writing a book, I feel like if I'm doing my job correctly, I'm not starting with the archetypal or the thematic or the psychological. I'm just writing the story. And then when I'm done with it, I look back on it and realize what the story meant to me.
Yeah.
So it's sort of weird, because if you start with the thematics and fill them in, then it becomes a little paint by numbers.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so and so it's this funny thing where, like, one of the things that I realized is, you know, he's given the 10 commandments, operational commandments to live by his handler and father figure. You know, never take it personal. You know, never make it personal, assume nothing, how you do anything's how you do everything. And when the series opens, it's him sort of reinventing himself away from those firm parameters and sort of breaking all of these commandments in his reconstruction of him being a new and different person. And it's so funny, because I started writing these books when I was 40. And I realized in hindsight, looking back at it, that part of what I was doing and dealing with in my own life was looking at all the rules that I'd lived by, which were pretty good and mostly adaptive with a lot of flaws and problems to get me through the first half of life. But upon turning 40, I was sort of figuring out, you know, what parts of myself I have to let go of and reinvent to make sense for the back part of my life.
Right.
And here I am with no awareness of this till my 4th book's on the verge of coming out. And I was sitting down thinking about it. It was like, oh, of course, that's what I'm writing about.
You know, this is why I really believe that politics makes you stupid, because you get caught in this box of beliefs and it's very hard to get out, and it becomes about personality. I hate Trump and I hate Obama, you know, and this sort of thing. But art makes you smarter, because it actually explains yourself to you. When you write a book, you're right. I find about 2/3 of the way through, I start to think like, oh, I get what I'm writing about. Now I understand what I'm writing about. And then it all sort of falls into place. But that's really interesting. It is about reinventing yourself, and it is, in thriller terms, it is in fact a sort of rite of passage into adulthood. You know?
Yeah, well, and what's funny is you and I mean, we are big proponents of the First Amendment.
Yep.
And what's funny is a lot of the time, and Jordan Peterson makes this point a lot.
I want to talk about Jordan.
Yes, all right. But we figure out what we think by talking, however imperfectly, and stumbling and making missteps. Right. And part of it, I mean, you and I have been friends now 15, 17, a long time.
Yeah.
There's not a ton that we agree on politically.
Right.
But I never have a feeling if I'm with you discussing something that if I stumble or make a point that there's some version where you're going to like judge my moral character as a result of it. Like we can kind of combat and discuss things. And it's so funny because with writing too, I feel like if I'm taking a frame of saying I'm going to write about my, grappling with existential issues at 40, the book would be lacking. It would be flat.
It would be Jonathan Franzen. Everybody would praise it, no one would read it.
Right. But so it's interesting because there's a similar thing that if you go on the exploration as a writer with fiction and let it take you where it will, it's a similar thing to having a conversation take you where you will.
That's right.
And the more that you want to armor and go, oh well, you just said a buzz phrase that I don't like. One of the examples I give a lot is when I was growing up, my background, liberal family. And when I was in, let's call it junior high school, if anyone ever said family values, I'd have like this knee-jerk reaction against it. And then, I grow up, I have 2 kids, I'm married, I'm like, hey, maybe I should have family values, right? I mean, so there's these phrases that we, but like to explore, and it's funny because it's one of the reasons I think that you and I get along so well is if there's a basis in fiction and narrative writing, and we're trying to be real, we're trying to write real things. It's an exploratory process, the way that a conversation has to be. And, it's funny because I do some help with Democrats trying to kind of wrangle things. And I come back a lot. I quote you a lot for a line that we had. You and I were out at dinner and you said something about 10 years ago. And you said, every time I turn on the TV, if it's the Oscars or something else, I'm told how stupid I am as a conservative.
Yeah.
And it really stuck with me. And it's one of these frames that really change how I view entertainment, how I view the things that Democrats are saying. And it's like this amazing thing because if I sit down and go to dinner with people who only agree with me, it's like there's not as much that I can learn.
Right. And one of the things about writing novels is you have to invent characters that you may disagree with or may hate, but you have to get into their minds, and that really gives you a little bit of understanding and compassion for them, and it spreads you out. I want to go back. One of the things I brag about here is I have a lot of people on the show who then later become famous. I can spot people, and one of the people I brag about is Jordan Peterson, and then I suddenly realized, oh no, wait, I didn't actually spot him. You told me to look at his YouTube. Now, the minute I saw it, I had him on the show way back. I mean,
early
he
days.
had like 600 hits on YouTube or something. But you knew him quite well.
Yeah, Jordan was my thesis advisor when I was an undergrad. I took a young seminar from him, personality psychology, and then he was my thesis advisor. And then he and I stayed very close. He officiated my wedding, which was kind of great. I always joke that it was the only wedding with references to Cain and Abel and Kierkegaard. We just rewatched it recently. My wife had a great line because we were rewatching the wedding and she's sitting there and there's one point where Jordan gets very Jordan and she goes, this was the point where I wasn't sure if I was getting married or being traded for a herd of goats. But Jordan's been a big part of like a good moral touchstone for me. And then when he was playing around with his book, with it was actually on Quora, he was listing these rules for life.
He praises you in the book as an editor numerous times.
Yeah, he makes fun of me too, though. Like,
everybody makes fun of you, Greg.
Of course, that's
usually behind your back. But
he did it in print. He stood behind it, Drew, unlike you.
Exactly.
But what's funny is I love this Quora thing, and so I put those rules in Orphan X. So this is now 2 years before 12 Rules for Life came out. Or as I say, this is when he was lowercase Jordan Peterson, not capital Jordan Peterson. And that was the template. I talked about those 10 commandments, the assassin rules that are kind of more rigid. And I wanted a counterpoint with Orphan X. So now he's, assimilated into society to some extent. He lives under a cover identity. There's a single mom downstairs with a boy who he relates to a lot. And she's trying to raise this boy more properly or in a more like robust moral fashion. And so she has these Post-it notes up that are Jordan Peterson's Rules for Life when no one had heard of it.
That's
which was
funny. So now you're just stealing from Jordan Peterson.
Right. So now all of a sudden, so we're all kind of tangled up in that. So his book came out and obviously is an enormous success. And I'd been writing about it. Then he's thanking me. I was helping him, work and shape up that book before it was a book. So it's funny how we've tangled up in each other's work.
So I think it's fair to say, I'm not sure I would call you a leftist, but you're a liberal. You're you basically.
I'm certainly not a leftist. I'm a liberal.
But you're a liberal and Democrat. What do you think of the way he's been treated? I mean, I don't want to just talk about Jordan because I want to get back to what you were saying about Democrats, but just briefly, what do you think of the fact that he's being called like a sexist and a white supremacist, and he gets called all this crazy stuff?
I think it's reprehensible. I mean, Jordan and I have been in conversation about this before he, came out with his position on Bill C-16.
Right.
So, I mean, and a lot of this has been, I was one of the first people to go on record and defend him when there weren't a lot of people willing to put their name, in an interview behind it. I mean, I think it's reprehensible. I think it's stupid. I think it's wildly inaccurate. If you want to bother going on and looking, he has hour-long, podcasts or lectures about what's wrong with the alt-right and how they need to get out of their parents' basements. I mean, one of the other things, the charges of anti-Semitism I love so much, because I always say, given that Jordan officiated my wedding 15 years ago, he's the most incompetent anti-Semite I've ever met.
I know, there's a lot of...
What an idiot,
when you listen to the left, there are a lot of incompetent racists and anti-Semites. Yeah. So you actually go and talk to Democrats about, you're kind of like the conservative whisperer. You're trying to tell them to stop. I mean, it really is uncivil to continually call people racist when you disagree with them.
Well, yeah, and what I'm also trying to do is to figure out ways to there's so many voices in the Democratic Party that you would agree with, that we would sit down with and be able to have very civil discourse and talk about their positions that are aspirational, that are pro-business, that understand high conscientious approaches to seemingly liberal values, that share a lot of those same things, and also come from a position of look, if you and I disagree on healthcare or on a tax scheme, I come from a position of saying, I know that you care deeply about people who are left off the dominance hierarchy. I know that you do. You have some different concerns with the ways that we might get there that might take away people's personal accountability and won't be as positive. But if you can leave this sort of moral judgment aside and start to have conversations, there might be some differences on where people fall. And so I've had this interesting realization lately that when I talk about moderate or centrist Democrats, I'm not even just talking about policy, because I don't actually mind if some people are in a deeper blue district and want to experiment with things. The part that bugs me is I can look into your eyes and judge your moral character and find it lacking. I can judge your lower empathy approach as being if I could just educate you more, then you'd understand. And there's actually a lot of them, but the problem is, and we deal with this on both sides of the party, the voices that get the attention are the furthest left and they're amplified. TV. And so part of it is, with Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, she's plastered all over. And it's not just that this is Fox and Drudge and Breitbart sort of weaponizing this to strategic aim. She's all over the Washington Post and the New York Times too, because it's clickbait and readership. And for me, it's look, she has a particular voice and approach from a deep blue district, and that should be taken on the facts and the merits, positive or negative. But there's a whole host of amazing candidates in the middle who are not going to make a headline because saying so-and-so has a very reasonable bipartisan take on tax code or how taxes should be approached doesn't get attention.
But given that, do you not think the Democrat Party is moving to the left?
I actually don't. I mean, I worked with, a number of candidates, all of whom have what you and I would deem to be centrist, moderate, certainly approach in having regard and respect for people who think differently than them, can speak to libertarians, Republicans, independents who had to win in the districts where they won. So not only in the approach, but even in terms of the value scheme of recognizing that innovation and accountability are essential and differentiation of outcome. So it's sort of if we can start from a way, and we're going to have different proclivities based on ways that we're set up, big five personality traits are, I happen to have a fairly high empathy, but I'm also pretty high conscientiousness. I can really understand.
Zero empathy.
Yeah, you are? Drew, you have nothing. You got nothing. Thank God you found Christ. Yeah. Because before that, exactly. you would have been American Psycho.
That's right. Empathy only because I fear hell. That's it.
Yeah, that's it. But there's so much, if we can get rid of and dodge the kind of aspect of judgment and actually have conversations. And it's a lot of what I've been doing. I actually went back and sat down with Chris Halverson, who was the evangelical chaplain to the Senate. And I sat down with an evangelical group when I was there in order to say, look, I don't care about merely winning points and doing all this other stuff. What I want to do is have people of goodwill and good intentions on either side. I don't care if there's policy points that we disagree on, and we have disagreements about, as I do with you, about abortion, about death penalty. We have different positions that we have. But more to the point is to say, look, if there's somebody who's a Democrat who is a person of faith and they're trying to figure out something like, let's say, rural medicine that is not a predominant concern for most Democrats and wants to get something done to help people in her district, can we forge across the aisle alliance to get a bill written that actually is going to help people? Yeah. Because that's an example where, like, you know, we're talking all the time about the cost of healthcare, but guess what? If you can't get to a hospital, it doesn't matter how much it costs.
Yep.
So is there a way that we can raise the frame above who we hate, who we want in power, and actually look at it and go, the job of everybody is, despite our disagreements, where can we set those aside at times and find common ground to actually help citizens and working people who are trying to figure out what they want to do?
Yeah, yeah. Gregg Hurwitz, you can tell he's not as stupid as I keep telling him he is. His new book, Out of the Dark, part of the Orphan X series. And why? What's with the 2 G's in your? I mean, come on. It's just pretentious.
It's my parents basically wanted to name me to ensure that my name would be misspelled for the rest of my life. And I would have to keep, like, wonkishly correcting everybody.
Gregg, it's great to see you. Good luck with the book. And
Thank
I'll talk to you soon.